Today we're going to put some nice long yarn hair on these little elf family dolls. You can find the pattern for these elf dolls on sweetbriersisters.com. First, we are going to wrap the back of the head with some yarn. That way, if you see between the yarn strands of hair, it doesn't look like there's a bald spot. You're going to start this by putting a row of pins down each side of the head. I will be putting 8 pins on each side of the head. The amount of pins can vary. It depends on how thick your yarn is and how big the head of the doll is that you are adding your yarn onto. Once you have your pins in place, you can take your yarn. I'm doing a double strand of yarn just because my yarn is a little bit thin, but if you're using a larger yarn like a worsted weight, you could just do a single strand, that would be fine. You're gonna hold one end of the yarn up on the head with one hand, and with the other hand, you will wrap the yarn back and forth between the pins that you placed. After your yarn is all wrapped, you're going to take a needle and sewing thread and sew each loop in place by the pin, and then you can remove the pin as soon as you have sewn the loop in place. You're going to go along each side and do that with every single pin, securing each loop of yarn in place with your needle and thread. And I like to put a knot on every single loop just because these will be played with by children, and I like to make sure they're nice and strong. And this is what it looks like when you're all done with this first step. In our next step, we're going to be adding the front piece of hair. You'll start by adding about 4 pins from the top center of the head down to the forehead, as low as you want the hair to go. You'll take the end of the yarn. I just left that end from when I wrapped the back of the head. And we're gonna wrap our yarn around the pins, and this time, instead of wrapping them on pins on each side, I'm taking it all the way down to the toes, wrapping it back up, wrapping around a pin, down to the toes. I want this doll to have really long hair, that's why I'm going all the way down to her toes. You could just go to the waist or however long you want the hair. Once those are wrapped, you're going to secure them with a needle and thread, just like you did on the back of the head. Now you've got one side of your hair done, and we're just going to do the other side. This doll is going to have a little bit of a middle part in this front part of her hair. Of course, if you wanted to have a side part, you could have put your pins off to the side instead of the center. You're going to replace the pins just right where they were, and you're going to do the same thing to the other side. And again, you will just hold those in place as you sew them securely with a needle and thread and remove those pins. I like to sink the thread into the head and clip it so you don't have the tail of the thread poking out. We now have 2 sides of the front hair, and I'm going to sweep them as if they were going to be kind of tucked behind her ears, and I will just sew them in place. This will just keep the hair nice and tidy looking. The back we're not going to sew in place like this, but I like to do it for the front piece just so that it looks a little bit neater and it stays in place around the face. And I'm just doing this with a back stitch. And once that side is done, I'll just go ahead and do it to the second side. Now our front hair is all in place. We're going to add in the bulk of the hair in the back of the head. You'll start with a nice crown of pins just along the top of the head, kind of in a line. I like to think of going from one ear to the other ear. And again, how close you want these pins will depend on how thick or thin your yarn is. Obviously, if you have a thicker yarn, you could make them farther apart. And it also depends on how thick you want the hair. The closer your pins are together, the thicker the hair will end up being. I'm holding one end of the yarn down by the toes, and once I get that even, again, I'm doing a double strand of yarn just because I'm doing this thin yarn and it would have taken just forever to do it with a single strand at a time. So I'm doing a double strand, but you could do a single strand if you prefer. And I'm just wrapping the yarn around each of those pins and bringing it down to the toes because I'm doing the nice long foot length hair, I guess, toe length hair. And you are going to go all the way around this crown of pins. And if you find that your yarn is coming off of the pins while you wrap, you could definitely go in and secure your loops with a needle and thread before finishing looping all of your yarn across that whole crown of pins. It would just depend on the kind of yarn that you're using and how far apart the yarn is and things like that. So play it by ear on your own doll. And once you have everything wrapped, you're just going to go ahead and secure each of these loops with a needle and thread, and of course remove your pins as you go. Now you could, if you just wanted your doll to look like they have long hair, you could just leave it like this and it would appear as a full head of hair. I like to have a nice thick head of hair that I can go ahead and style and put in ponytails and braids and things. So I'm going to go ahead and do a bunch of rows of hair, but you could just stop here and it would look like a head of hair. Because I want my thick hair, I'm putting in a little row of yarn in the back and securing it. This video is going to go a little bit faster since you've seen this process before. But all I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep adding rows of pins and wrapping yarn, securing them with a needle and thread, then flipping that hair up and adding another row of pins. And I'm just going to keep continuing that process until I get to the bottom of the head. This will give me a nice full head of hair that I can part down the middle or part down the sides. There shouldn't be any bald spots. On our last row of hair, we're going to line it up with the bottom of the yarn that we used to wrap the back of the head. That way, if we pull up the back hair into a ponytail, it'll look right. And again, I'm just always using the tip of those toes as my measurement for how long I want the hair to go. I've got all of my rows all done, and I'm going to smooth the hair down and give it a nice trim to get rid of all of the loops that are on the end. You'll want to run your hands through and just make sure you got all of the loops. Now I'm going to do a little optional addition. I'm going to put just a little braid of hair along the edge of that front hair just to add a little bit of something extra. You'll just braid some yarn, pin it in place along the edge of that front hair. And I was just trying to figure out, I wanted to get it exactly centered. That's why I pinned it and unpinned it there. And then you'll just go ahead and sew it in place with a needle and thread. I am tacking it really well right at the edge of the hair, and then I'll just do a running stitch along the braid to keep it in place. And then I'll go ahead and I guess tack is the word, tack it really well on the other side about where the ear would be. I'm really just wrapping it a lot of times. I'm going to go ahead and undo the rest of the braid that isn't sewn onto the head. So that's why I'm wrapping it so much. I want that thread to hold the braid closed. You'll see what I mean right here. So I'm actually unbraiding this part, just that way the strands of hair can kind of be brushed in with the other hair. And there's our final product, a nice full head of hair that can be styled.